UFC Salt Lake City was this past weekend on Fox Sports 1. But before I get to my recap of the main card, a couple of news items I would like to go over in the world of combat sports. Friend of the show, Chai Lewis Perry, as he said on this very program just a few weeks ago, he would like another shot at Xavier Vigny. As of right now, only loss in the Glory organization, the top kickboxing organization in the world. He got his wish, and it will be at Glory's very next event, Glory 33, September 9th in New Jersey. Of course, featuring the main event of Rico Verhoeven defending his heavyweight title once again against Anderson Silva. Also, main eventing the Super Fight Series, Simon Marcus defending his middleweight championship for the second time against Jason Wilness. And Chai Lewis's heavyweight fight against Xavier Vigny will, I believe, serve as the co-main event for the Super Fight Series portion of the card. And there's also scheduled to be a featherweight tournament at Glory 33 to serve on the main card as well. Very excited that Chai, first of all, gets right back in there quickly after his second round knockout over Maurice Green. And also happy to see that he got the fight. I think he kind of deserved another shot at Vigny. Of course, the first time he took on Vigny was part of a tournament, I believe, back in Glory San Diego. So for him, the whole camp just dedicated to Xavier Vigny. I think things will be a little different this time around. But either way, he's an exciting guy. So is Vigny. If Chai can get by Vigny, Chai shoots up in the Glory rankings. I would expect him to be in the top 10 and would definitely be on the hunt for a possible title shot in 2017. Also, some other news and notes to go on here. Also, friend of the show, Michelle Waterson, she had a fight booked for UFC Hamburg against Aisling Daly. However, as of right now, I don't think they've reported what injury or exactly why the Irish woman has pulled out of that fight against Waterson, but she is out. The UFC is looking for a replacement. I put something on Twitter saying it would be cool if Tecia Torres would be able to fill in for Daly, since Torres was supposed to take on Waterson last December before Waterson pulled out due to an injury. And of course, Torres has not fought since her loss to Rose Namajunas back in April of this year, which was about 4 months ago. So you figured Ticia's got to be amping to get another fight, get back in there, add in, it's already a fight she was going to have about 9 months ago taking on Waterson, so she's already done some preparation for Michelle, so it wouldn't be quite that big a deal jumping in short notice. Tecia Torres always in great shape, and of course Waterson has been out for a while, but has battled back from injury and would be ready to go, so we'll see what happens. Possibly, if they don't find an opponent, I would say within the next week or two, Waterson may get moved out that card to a later date. I think that's even a possibility. If there's some openings later in the month there for September, they could possibly move her fight back to another location. So we'll see how that goes, but still kind of a shame because I was looking forward to seeing Michelle Waterson again. Also, speaking of friends of the show, as we're continuing here, kind of the theme, as listeners can see, Brandon Gertz, who we've had on the show a few times, he, of course, tore his ACL after his win against Derek Campos. That was at Bellator 146. And despite that just being 6 months ago, doctors have cleared the Grudge Training Center product to return to active training. And he said that he is looking for a fight sometime this fall, possibly against Josh Thompson. As of right now, Josh Thompson does not have a fight booked under Bellator's banner, and I think that's a good fight if he can get it. I wasn't sure when he was going to return. I think I talked about on this program Josh Thompson facing Michael Chandler, since that fight was supposed to be happening back in May. But who knows, because if Thompson's still a little injured and it's going to be a few times, that could work out perfectly with Gertz, and to me that's an easily #1 contender fight, because I believe the winner of Pitbull and Ben Henderson, especially if Ben Henderson wins, will get a shot at Michael Chandler for the Bellator 155 title. So Gertz definitely is back in the mix, and I'm glad to hear he's back. I think while an ACL injury can still be devastating and still can take people some time off, I think the fact it's happened so much in the last 15, 20 years in high-level athletics. I think the surgery process 1 and 2, the recovery process has been done by so many people now. There's a good blueprint out there how to recover and how to recover quickly and healthy and safely. And I think that's the only positive about having an injury like that, is the fact that it's happened to so many people, and I think a lot of athletes are able to come back quicker from it. So I think that's a good thing, as opposed to injuring all your ligaments, kind of like Juliana Pena or Dante Culpepper, where you tear the A, the M, and the PCL. That is a lot more serious injury because you're tearing all 3 major ligaments in your knee. Whereas just the ACL, you're just tearing 1, so you're going to obviously come back quicker. So good for Brandon. I'm excited to see him back. Of course, his last fight only lasted 40 seconds, so he's definitely a guy on the rise within Bellator's 155 division, and hopefully he can get that fight against Josh Thompson or another top Bellator 155er this fall. Ben Saunders. Many were flummoxed when they heard that he had been released from the UFC a second time, despite putting up a 3-1 record in his second sit with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. However, it appears that Ben Saunders had a lot of personal issues going on, including the death of his grandparents and other stuff going on in his life, where he simply just kind of lapsed on a renewal offer from the UFC and kind of missed his window to sign. However, it appears the UFC didn't really want to get rid of him, and in the expedience of just booking a fight to stay active, Ben Saunders will take on another former UFC fighter in Jacob Volkman, and that will be at Fight Night at the Island, and that's going to be at the Treasure Island Resort and Casino in Welch, Minnesota, and I believe that's coming up later this month or in September. And according to MMA Junkie, he's just kind of had a bad time in his life, and he's saying the UFC probably took his silence, not really telling the UFC what was going on with Killa B, and kind of took that as somewhat of a resignation. And it sounds as though even a loss to Volkman, they may let him back now that maybe this story has come out, that just things weren't going well for him in his life. So I hope people do read this story and realize that the UFC just didn't cut a guy going 3-1 for no reason. And hopefully Ben Saunders can return. He's always an exciting guy. Of course, as of right now, the only man to ever successfully pull off an omoplata inside the octagon. So I think this guy will be welcome back, even with the possible loss to Jacob Volkman. I think if you look at the circumstances that he finally actually explains to the UFC kind of what was going on, I think they'll probably give him a break. Obviously, they let him back into the organization a second time. There's obviously a good relationship there to let him back into the ranks after leaving for a while. So I got to believe he will return probably late this year or early next year in the UFC. It sounds like he just got to get some things sorted out personally, and obviously he said he was having problems with his management team as well, so that's probably something that has to be sorted out too. So just kind of a public service announcement. Ben Saunders did not get cut. Don't go internet forum rampage there on our friends at the MMA community or MMA Fight Club.net, the Facebook page. So don't go on a rampage saying that Saunders shouldn't have been cut and stuff. He technically wasn't cut. In an interesting turn of events, UFC bantamweight Ning Ganyu did test positive for a banned substance, according to the USADA. However, he will not be facing a suspension. He had trace amounts of clenbuterol, the USADA officials announced today. This is a MMA Junkie staff article on their page right now. And the UFC's anti-doping partner said Guan Yu, who won the inaugural Ultimate Fighter China, did test positive for that substance, clenbuterol, which is banned for its off-label use as an anabolic agent, following an on-a-competition drug test administered on May 19th. because he ingested it without fault or negligence, he won't face disciplinary action. The USADA reviewed all of the evidence, including the athlete's whereabouts, dietary habits, and the lab reports demonstrating very low parts per billion of that substance in the athlete's urine sample, and concluded that the presence of clenbuterol was probably very likely due to clenbuterol-contaminated meat that has been consumed in China recently. And as a statement from the USADA has been read, again on this article on MMA Junkie, as a result, Guan Yu will not face a period of ineligibility for this positive test. The USADA also wanted to point to a warning from WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, which stated that meat from China and Mexico that's raised for food production may contain this clenbuterol. And a third-party agency claimed meat raised in the U.S. does not have that same issue. Also, there's a further statement saying, while the risk of consuming clenbuterol-tainted meat and testing positive for an athlete are extremely small, consistent with past athlete advisories, the USADA reminds athletes to use the utmost care if eating meat known in high-risk countries, including Mexico and China. The statement also read, in line with WADA recommendations, the USADA will continue to assess the presence of clenbuterol in an athlete's sample on a case-by-case basis, taking into account all the evidence supported with the likelihood of such contamination. Of course, also Frank Mir, who tested positive earlier this year, he indicated that the reason he failed his drug test with his fight against Mark Hunt in Australia was due to the result of eating wild game. However, I have not heard any conclusion one way or the other that that is indeed why the former heavyweight champion did test positive for that fight there in Australia. Now, Guan Yu is slated to face tough Latin America veteran Marlon Vera at UFC 202 next week in Las Vegas. UFC officials said because it was initially unclear as to the timing of the resolution of the investigation, that bout has been pushed back to the following week, UFC on Fox 21 in Vancouver at the Rogers Arena. So, good for Guan Yu that the officials there at the USADA went through the proper steps. And for anyone who says people are out on a witch hunt, or they don't go through their process, or they never follow things up, if there's any doubt that they're trying to do the best for these athletes and these sports and keep it clean, I think a story like this, to me, proves that the UFC getting involved with the USADA is a good thing. Because I think if this happened before, maybe using some sort of third party, or if the UFC was doing the testings themselves, I don't know if they would have found something like this out. I really don't. I don't think they would have had the resources nor the time to put into figuring out that meat has been contaminated in countries like China and like Mexico, and the low traces of that in his sample would be from just eating regular food in his country where he lives and trains. I don't know if they would have been able to figure that out. So by hiring an organization like this that does what they do, and obviously they do it very well to figure this stuff out, I think is a good thing. And if there was any doubt that this program is working and is giving people a fair shake, I think this is an excellent example, because if you just look at a paper, you go, oh, we tested positive for this. But if you really look at it, the report also said there was low trace amounts. It wasn't an overwhelming amount of the substance. So that's good. And also I think it goes to show to other fighters, if they do happen to be visiting China or Mexico, especially Mexico, because the UFC is obviously has run a few events there already and is planning on doing another one in November. That's something these fighters are going to have to look out for. That maybe don't eat that there. Maybe eat something else, or try to. It's hard to bring food internationally, especially if you're flying in. If you are lucky enough to be able to drive into Mexico, perhaps that might be a little easier to transport said food. But I guess definitely fighters traveling abroad, I think, are going to have to look out for that. And that, I think, does add a little credibility to Frank Mir's story for Australia. At first, I was pretty skeptical that that was indeed the case. However, now after hearing this report, I'm not saying Frank Mir is 100% telling the truth now. However, I could kind of see why he would say that, considering no one has really said something like that before, especially a high-profile fighter like Frank Mir. It does kind of beg the question whether or not that's true. Now, they're going to have to take a lot into account, because if he said wild game, that's not something he bought at the store, I would assume. I don't know, maybe it's not something that common. So, again, this was a test in May that was an out-of-competition test for Ning. So this is about a 3-month process. I believe Mir's fight was around that same time there in May. So we may see some development on that Frank Mir situation moving forward. I mean, if they could figure this out, they could probably figure out whether or not Frank Mir did or did not eat some sort of contaminated wild game meat. All right, before I get to my breakdown of UFC Salt Lake City, I got a chance to sit down with Invicta FC rising star Megan Anderson about her latest win at Invicta FC 18. Jim Graham here for Beyond the Cage. Now joining me on the line, I have a special guest. She is fresh off her victory at Invicta FC 18 over Peggy Morgan. She is Megan Anderson. And Megan, thanks for coming on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
I want to get to your fight right off the bat here at Invicta FC 18. Once again, another first-round finish for you inside the Invicta cage. Is that pretty much what you expected, another quick finish looking at this fight against Peggy?
Yeah, it's what we expected. We knew she was tough coming into this fight. But, you know, we train super hard, and I'm always trying to improve my skills. And I knew that, you know, she might have been tough before, but, you know, I don't think she was ready for the pressure that we were going to come at her with.
Now, after the fight, her cheek there, I believe that was her right cheek, completely swollen. Obviously, that was from your handiwork, but have you ever seen a fighter look like that after a fight before, whether you did it to him or you've seen someone else?
No, I've never seen anything like that before. I remember like seeing it happening during the fight. Like I think it was like the second time we were up against the cage. I remember hitting her, and I could see blood going down onto the mat. And I thought to myself like, oh, I've opened up her nose. We ended up getting off the cage. I looked up, and it wasn't her nose. Like her mouth was like bleeding from like inside her mouth. Like her lips had gone completely blue. Like the side of her face had started to swell. And I was like, oh my God.
Now, of course, you did win the fight, and that's what you're trying to do. But did you feel bad at all for Peggy?
Not really. Like, you know, if it was, you know, if it happened to me, you know, I wouldn't feel sorry for myself, because I willingly entered into a fight where things like this could happen. You know, she could have been able to do something and I ended up breaking my arm or something like that. You know, it's the fight game, and anything could happen, and injuries like this can happen. Like I'm glad to see that she's had like a speedy recovery and there's nothing too damaged, which is good to see. But, you know, it's the fight game. Like it is what it is. And sometimes it doesn't look pretty.
Now, I know, of course, after the fight, you had the post-fight interview there with Lauren Sanko, and you didn't really care what was next for you in terms of a opponent, but with Chris Cyborg once again booking a fight with the UFC coming up towards the end of September, it looks as though that wouldn't be next for you. So with that kind of in mind, would somebody like a Charmaine Tweet be possibly what's next for you, Megan?
I guess. Like I said, I really don't give. If Charmaine tweets who's next, then so be it. If a rematch with Cindy Dandois is next, then so be it. You know, we'll take what Invicta gives us.
Now, what do you think about this fight that Cyborg has taken against Lena Landsberg, a 6-1 fighter out of Sweden? Do you think that's another easy fight for Cyborg?
I have no idea. I don't really know much about this Landsberg girl. I feel like it's a little weird that they're bringing in like a no-name that's never fought for the UFC, doesn't fight for Invicta, hasn't fought for any of the known promotions. I found it a little weird. Like, no one knows who she is, so like I feel like they're kind of bringing her in, but who knows? She might be able to pull something out. You never know.
Now, after her first fight in the UFC, Cyborg seemed pretty animate to return to Invicta to defend her title. Obviously, that's not the case with her now taking this another fight in the UFC. Did that kind of surprise you at all that she won't be defending her title next and instead is fighting with the UFC again?
No, not really. Like her contract has always been with the UFC. I think that's what people forget. Yes, she fought for Invicta and she's the Invicta featherweight champion, but her contract has always been with Zuffa, with the UFC. And now that she's made weight at 140 and she's fought for them, like I didn't see the UFC wanting her to fight anywhere else but for them. You know, she's going to bring in a lot of viewers, which is what they like, and she's got like a big following and she's got a lot of attention around her. So like I completely see why the UFC wouldn't want her fighting for Invicta or even, you know, getting injured in training for a fight that's not for the UFC.
Do you feel as though if she continues to fight for the UFC that Invicta should either A, create an interim title, or B, actually tell Cyborg to vacate the championship so ladies like you in the division can kind of move on without her?
I guess that's really up to Shannon. I don't really know what they're going to do. I don't know how that's all going to unfold, but I'm sure we'll find out soon if Chris does continue to keep fighting and booking fights in the UFC.
Now, of course, you took almost no damage there against Peggy. Would you like to return as soon as Invicta has a next event there?
I don't really. I would like to take a break. I've just done 2 back-to-back fights. I was on Invicta 17 and 18. I'd like to go home and visit my family. I haven't seen them in over a year, so that would be nice. I just would like to visit my family. Like, you know, a lot of these girls, they don't live away from their friends and family. They don't live away from home. Like, it's different for them. They get to see their loved ones every single day. I don't, so I'd like to go home, visit my family, come back, and then we'll see what Invicta wants to do with me next.
Now, how long have you been living in Kansas City?
Since September last year, like early September. So I think by the time I go home, it will be like a year, a little bit over a year.
So in the year you've been here in the United States exclusively, what would you say in terms of just living like a normal day-to-day life is different from living in Australia as opposed to living in the United States?
Well, for one, my family's not here. I'm super close to my mom and my dad and my brother, and I used to live with them. You know, it's hard not being able to particularly see my mom and my dad. I have a really close relationship with them, and I know they struggle with me being here, and they wish that they could be here and support me, but you know, it's kind of expensive to fly to America from Australia. But I guess in a different way, it's just a different culture here. It's a different way of life. We're very, you know, we're hardworking, like, you know, we're hardworking, but we're also really laid back. You know, we're not really, I guess, you know, we're almost too laid back, if you guess. So it's a very different way of thinking here, different way of life, and that's one of the hardest things that have been to adjust, is just the different ways of thinking. And we have so many different terms for things, and people always ask me, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? So that's one of the things that's been hard to get used to.
Now, one thing that, at least for you there in Kansas City, that Kansas City is known for is its barbecue. So I was wondering, is that one of the bonuses to staying in Kansas City, is being able to sample some of that fare?
Yeah, it's not too bad. I haven't really had much. Like, it's like I'm not like I eat pretty healthfully all year round. Like I might go and have a bit of a cheat meal every now and then when I'm out of fight camp. But yeah, like I like the barbecue here. It's good, but I guess I didn't. It's not keeping me in Kansas City.
Now, obviously in Kansas City, they have the Kansas City Chiefs and Kansas City Royals for sporting events, and obviously
Yep.
Much different than the sports you probably would normally
Yep.
visit in Australia. So
Very
have you
true.
taken to the American sports, or are you still partial to what you're used to in Australia?
I still have yet to watch a complete game of baseball or NFL. Um, if I don't get it. I don't understand the rules, and most of the people that I've become friends with here, it's mainly just fighters. So we watch the fights all the time. We're always talking about fights and learning new things about fighting. Like it's not really a like I know Kansas City is really into the Royals at the moment because they won the World Series last year, but it's not really. I have no idea how it's played, so it's not really. I'm not interested in it too much.
Now, I know, of course, there at Glory MMA and Fitness, Zach Cummings is one of the guys that you trained with
Yep.
there at the gym, and he just had a fight in Salt Lake City. Unfortunately, it didn't go his way, but what did you think about his fight there against Santiago Ponzinibbio?
He is one tough, tough guy. I messaged him after the fight, and I was just like, "Oh my God, you would have to have one of the hardest heads I've ever seen." Like, some of the shots he got hit with were like crazy, and he just smiled and kept coming forward. He is such a tough guy, and it was a tough fight. His opponent was durable. He was tough. He came to fight, and it was such a back and forth battle for position and for dominance and pressure, and like he looked so good, and just unfortunately on the night it didn't go his way.
Another one of the guys there at Glory MMA and Fitness, of course, is James Krause. He got injured earlier this year, forced him out of a bout with Ross Pearson at the Ultimate Fighter finale a couple months ago. And I was wondering, how is he doing in his injury recovery?
Um, J- James didn't get injured. He had family circumstances that pulled him out of the fight. But he's just taken on his 11-year-old sister as he's now the full guardian for her. So, that's really his story to tell. But he's a phenomenal coach, and he puts his family and us at Glory and MMA and Fitness first, and I'm sure he'll be back in the cage soon.
Also there at Glory is Tim Elliott, who's the current Titan flyweight champion. He will be featured on this upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter, where the winner gets a shot at the UFC flyweight championship. So, needless to say, are you pretty excited to see Tim on this upcoming season of the reality show?
Yeah, I'm super excited. Tim is such a character and has such a awesome personality. He just he's just himself. What he thinks, he says. So I'm super excited to see him on the show and see what he brings and the outcome of that. I think it's going to be a really exciting season, and I'm super excited to see what happens.
All right, now be honest with me. Who pulls off the cornrows better, you or Tim Elliott?
Probably Tim. He probably pulls them off better.
Now, of course, he has to keep his mouth quiet about what actually went down there in Las Vegas for the Ultimate Fighter. But have you or any of the other fighters or coaches there in Kansas City have tried to get some info out of him and try to torture him for what actually happened
Well,
there?
he's not back yet, so we haven't heard from him.
All right, I'll get you out of here with this. Of course, the Olympics are happening right now in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Yep.
And I was wondering, are there any events that you're interested in watching?
Um, I always find the powerlifting really interesting to watch. It's I always think like it's incredible that it lifts such like crazy amounts of weights, and like the judo has been like phenomenal this year. Like there's been so many upsets, and like those guys and girls are like ridiculous. They have such amazing skill. Has been super exciting to watch.
She is Megan Anderson. You can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at MeganA_MMA. And Megan, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to you fighting again in the future.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Once again, thanks to Megan Anderson for coming on the show, talking about her win there at Invicta FC 18. In case you missed it there, her social media handle on Twitter as well as Instagram is MeganA_MMA. So give her a follow on those platforms, and also like her athlete Facebook page, Megan Anderson, on Facebook as well. Getting to UFC Salt Lake City this past weekend, the first ever UFC event in the state of Utah. 6 fights were shown on the main card, but before I get to that real quickly, I want to go over the undercard, specifically one of the Fight Pass cards, one of the Fight Pass fights on the card, I should say, because it featured 2 top 15 featherweights going up against each other as Cub Swanson took on Tatsui Kawajiri. And definitely wanted to highlight this fight. Originally, I think it was supposed to be on the main card. They ended up moving it to try to draw people into getting Fight Pass there by putting it on that portion of the show. And if Kawajiri wouldn't be able to get this fight to the ground, he was going to have a hard time trying to stand up and fight Cub Swanson at range with Cub's excellent striking. And that pretty much was the case. Kawajiri tried his hardest. I mean, he tried 12 takedowns in this fight, was only successful on 3 of them, and landed 1 inside the first round, 2 in the third. But in the process of getting, for the most part, shut down, he got outstruck 91-51, 40 strikes. And also, they threw about the same. They 133 for Swanson, 132 for Kawajiri. So in about the same amount of output, Cub Swanson was able to land 40 more times. Cub also landed a takedown of his own in the third round and was on top for a bit. So this was a fight where Kawajiri just wasn't able to implement his game plan. I think that while he's great on top and does have good takedowns, getting to the top level guys, you can't be one-dimensional. You can't expect to go into a fight and just hope to get on top, and that's it. And I think Kawajiri, despite being a tough guy and having a long career, he is a little older now too, but you can't do that in the UFC. There are very few guys who can win just with one skill. I think the era of that happening is kind of gone by the wayside. You got to be able to do 2 or 3 different things well in the sport, and know that on any given day, if one of those things are taken away, you got to rely on the other one or the other 2. So being able to just simply get top control and ride a fight out there is not going to really happen against top guys. And Cub Swanson is a top guy in this division. A big win for him. I know Dennis Bermudez called out Frankie Edgar after the fight, but I do think a matchup between Cub and Dennis would be excellent moving forward. Heading into this fight, Dennis was ranked 8, Cub was ranked 5. And I believe those two have not crossed paths yet, despite being some of the top featherweights for the last couple of years in the UFC, and I think that would be a tremendous fight. Both are riding 2-fight winning streaks after a couple of losses. Of course, Swanson had back-to-back losses to Holloway and Edgar. However, here in 2016 has bounced back with 2 victories over the tough Hakran Diaz and now Kawajiri. So I think that would be a good matchup, but we'll see kind of what happens moving forward and how quickly Frankie wants to return. I know he probably would like to fight at Madison Square Garden, but I'm not sure if the UFC gives him Bermudez or someone else. Also, looking at the undercard, which I thought was excellent, Teruto Ishihara, boy, very exciting performance and win over Horatio Gutierrez as he netted one of the performance of the night bonuses with good reason. This dude was doing like dance moves during the weigh-ins. He was trying to, you know, flirt with like the ring girls. He wanted to party with all the girls there in Utah in his post-fight interview. This dude's just loving life, loving fighting. You know, a little wild and maybe has to tighten up his technique a little bit, but definitely has some power here in this featherweight division. Just needed a total of 13 strikes inside of 232 inside of round 1 to get the victory over Gutierrez. And this guy's going to be fun to watch. I mean, I got to give this guy credit. He hasn't fought in the UFC that long. He really hasn't been in the, you know, trying to learn English, I guess is for lack of a better term, for very long. This is only his 3rd UFC fight, his 2nd consecutive victory in Israel, and his 2nd win by knockout. And this dude really, since coming into the UFC, has been nothing short of entertaining. I mean, he had that awesome fight for that Road to the Octagon Japan there at the Barnett-Nelson fight, which ended in a draw against Mizuti Hirota. Then he knocked out former Ultimate Fighter cast member Julian Erosa. Then, you know, knocks out Gutierrez. This guy is pretty good. He's young. He's only 25 years old. Just had his 25th birthday back in July. 14 professional fights now. Stands at 10-2-2. I think this guy's definitely got a lot of potential here in this featherweight division, and I want to see him fight more. He's a fun guy to watch. I think he's a hard guy not to root for too. And I also like the fact that he's trying to learn English. A lot of fighters, if they're not native English speakers, you don't really see them. Well, maybe they are trying, but it doesn't seem like they're trying. And this dude seems like he's trying. He seems like he wants to speak English. He wants to get involved, talking with the fans over here in the United States. So definitely look forward to Ishihara fighting again for the UFC. Also, got the Polish flag behind me, so fans know I was excited to see Marcin Tybura take on Victor Pesta. And boy, Tybura did not disappoint. I thought he was looking great the whole night. He had great combinations. I thought he was moving very well for a heavyweight and was moving in and out. Didn't land at a high percentage as Pesta was really backing up, trying to avoid those shots from Tybura, but the shots that did landed were definitely lethal. Overall, only outstruck the man from the Czech Republic 20-4 overall, but you look at a fight that went into the 2nd round, that this dude, Victor Pesta, only landed 4 strikes and 0 for 2 on takedowns was rather telling. It just didn't seem early that he either 1, wanted to feel the power, or 2, was kind of scared of Tybura. And eventually in a finish to a striking combination with the hands, Tybura, again, agile for a big guy, threw up that head kick, landed it flush, and Pesta just went out cold. 53-second marker in the 2nd round. Big John had to come in and stop this one. And the man known as Tybura, Marcin Tybura, walks away with one of the performance of the night bonus victories, and deservingly so. Excellent performance by him. Another win in the UFC for the man from Poland. Actually, correct that, his first ever win in the UFC. And just his 2nd fight, he fought earlier this year in April, losing a tough-fought fight to Timothy Johnson, who's a very solid fighter in his own right. So credit to Tybura getting his first victory here in the UFC. And that guy looked completely different than his UFC debut against Timothy Johnson. I thought, even though this fight didn't go into the 3rd round, I thought he looked better with his pace, his striking. He did stop the 2 takedowns of Pesta. Of course, however, I don't think Pesta's quite maybe as good as Tim Johnson, but still, I think that Tybura looked a lot better, maybe more comfortable fighting in the UFC, and more comfortable with his training. They mentioned that he's training with some other Daniel Olenek, who's also in the UFC as well. So they said that that gym there in Poland starting to get some good UFC talent. So I think that as well, I think is helping him. But he looked vastly improved from his fight just 4 months ago against Timothy Johnson. I think it maybe could have been fighting that maybe until the main event, but Utah's own Court McGee took on Dominic Steele in a matchup in the welterweight division, and Dom Steele, known for being non-stop action-packed, as that's his nickname. Just a very entertaining fight. Overall, ended up going to Court McGee, who really was pushing for the takedown, probably more so than I've seen in any of his UFC fights, as he attempted to take Steele down 15 times in this bout. However, was only successful on 4 of the attempts. He was most successful in the first round, where he landed 2 takedowns. That round was close, as I think Steele tagged Court late into that first round, but definitely probably would have gave Court that round. Second round was close. All the rounds were kind of close. I probably would have gave, but I feel like Dominic Steele started to settle into a rhythm really towards the end of round 2 in terms of stopping the takedown and the striking. Probably would have gave Dom round 3, but I do agree with the judges giving the win to Court McGee, unanimous decision. 29-28 on 2 cards was, again, probably how I scored, and one judge did, however, score at 30-27. But Dom Steele, man, I tell you what, even a loss, very exciting. And so far since entering the UFC, I know he's just 2-3, but he had a win over Dong Hyun Kim. No, not that one, the other Dong Hyun Kim, which earned him a Performance of the Night bonus. And he had that quick loss, I believe it was on short notice, to actually technically 1-3. The other win was a win over in Strikeforce back in 2001, so technically 1-3. But this is another back-to-back exciting performance, even though he lost his fight against Danny Roberts back in April at UFC 197. That was Fight of the Night. And this, I thought, was a very excellent fight, even though he was on the wrong side of it. So I think Dom Steele will be back. I think he'll be given another chance in the UFC. I mean, if the dude keeps on bringing it like that, I think it's really hard to cut a guy like that after that performance. So I think we will see Dominic Steele again. And for Court McGee, since kind of re-returning due to injury, definitely not the same guy I remember. I think time is starting to come and catch up with them. Of course, I believe he's now, entering his mid-30s. Of course, he had that gap there from December 2013 where he lost to Ryan LaFleur before returning and fighting in December of 2015, taking on Marcio Alexandre Jr., and since then has gone 2-1. However, he did get knocked out in the first round against Santiago Ponzinibbio. So while I still think he's competitive because of he's a grinder, he has kind of a weird style. It's hard to mimic. I think I could definitely start to see that it's, Court McGee is definitely not that same guy I remember from his initial run in the UFC, who started his UFC career with 3 victories. Lost a couple of close fights there to Philopu and Nick Ring, dropped down to 170, went 2-1 before getting hurt. Of course, beating guys like Josh Neer and Robert Whittaker, who are all solid competitors as well. So, I don't know. I don't think he can kind of get back to what he was, because I feel like he did have a lot of momentum when he first dropped to welterweight. Again, he can still be competitive, but I don't know if he'll be able to crack the top 15, especially with how stacked this division is. But he could still be an exciting fighter, and still a guy I like to see fight. Getting to the main card portion of the fights, 6 fights, as I mentioned. Marina Moroz against Danielle Taylor was the first fight of the evening in the women's strawweight division. This was a very interesting fight because Taylor, making her UFC debut, took this fight on short notice against the top 10 strawweight in Moroz. And for Moroz, this was a dangerous fight because, one, you're taking on someone on short notice, and you didn't have a lot of time to switch opponents or prepare for the switch in opponents. And obviously, it's a much different opponent than you're originally going to take on. And 2, it's even a lesser-known name or lesser-ranked girl than you were fighting, and a loss really can set you back in this division, which is really not getting jammed or anything, but there are a lot of other girls that are starting to make their way up. It's a lot deep in terms of talent than it was just a year ago. So the loss could really set back Moroz. And I gotta credit Danielle Taylor because she didn't get hit a lot. She did a good job of avoiding getting hit. However, she did not respond too much, other than one big right hand in the second round and a brief takedown in the third, those are about the only positives for Danielle Taylor, who didn't really seem willing to engage. And while, yes, she avoided a huge percentage of the shots, I mean, if your opponent throws 250 strikes in a 15-minute fight, you probably expect to get hit 100 times, right? Or something. Like, even then, that's a overall, like, that's a pretty good clip, but not anything crazy. Moroz is only credited with landing 17 strikes out of 251 thrown. That is an incredible rate of not getting hit, or an incredible rate of just missing. And I don't think that's Moroz's striking being bad or just throwing up stuff that she had no business throwing. I think that was more of Taylor's willingness to not engage in the pocket and content to stay on the outside and not get hit. And for Taylor, I get it. You're taking on a top-level fighter. You don't want to get embarrassed by a fighter like Moroz. And I think just played it safe. I think was maybe also on the mindset, like, just happy to be here. I'm in the UFC now. I took this fight on short notice. You know, maybe her conditioning wasn't as good as it would have been, so she went with a different strategy. But this, to me, is not a Monroe's, because if you throw that many strikes in a fight, like I said, you expect to probably land close to 100. Her output looked great. I mean, she looked good. The 15 minutes to throw that many strikes, it looked like she could kept on going. Obviously, she would have liked to land a little more. I'm not that surprised Moroz really didn't try for a takedown. I think with Taylor being the shorter, stockier fighter, lower center of gravity, she was going to be tough to take down. And obviously, you're engaging Taylor at her level, and you're kind of getting into her zone. So I think she went with the right strategy, keeping at range. It's just simply Taylor just didn't want to engage. She was just looking. She was simply, to me, playing defense in this fight. She was not looking to be offensive at all. It was simply only looking to avoid the strikes of Moroz. So I was a little surprised to hear it was a split decision, to be honest. And I don't think there's any way you could really score Taylor winning this fight. I don't think you can give a fight to a girl that was playing defense the whole entire fight. So I'm glad Moroz did get the victory. Wasn't pretty. She did get the victory, and probably, I don't think you can blame her performance too much, but I think she does get a much higher ranked fighter for her next fight. Trevor Smith against Joe Gelati, not Gigliotti as I originally thought. Apparently the G is silent there for the UFC newcomer. And I kind of thought this matchup would go this way. Obviously, Joe, despite being a highly touted prospect, 7-1 coming into this fight, all 7 wins by finish, take on a veteran like Trevor Smith of, I believe, 19 bouts coming in. This one had fought in the UFC, I believe, 6 or 7 times, and just being a much bigger dude. Joe was listed at 5'11" to 6'3" for Trevor Smith. I think you basically saw a legit middleweight against a welterweight in this fight. After a decent first round by Joe, he landed a couple of shots, but just the size and grappling ability of Smith, I think, was going to be a lot for Joe to overcome. And just towards the end, I mean, that second round was a complete wash, definitely deserving of an 8, as Smith outstruck Gelati 42-0, and only 1 credited thrown strike for Gelati. And just 1 takedown for Smith. That's all he needed, as he was able to control completely the rest of the round. And this was just a very dominant performance by Joe. In fact, all 3 judges gave that second round, and deservingly so. If you're the new rules state, if you're constantly on the defense, you're throwing no offense, which throwing 1 straight, I think, demonstrates you're throwing no offense, you get an 8. And that was deserving of an 8, and just a dominant performance. I think Joe has to look to get down to the welterweight division. You know, Trevor Smith, if you can't get by Trevor Smith at middleweight, you probably shouldn't be there. Now, that's not saying Trevor Smith is bad or anything, but that dude is a big dude just size-wise. And if you're not going to be able to handle him, who is a middle-of-the-road UFC middleweight, you'd have no business being there. So while this was his debut, you can also throw in jitters and, he didn't get a quick finish. He's the guy used to finishing opponent, all that. You can throw all that in there. But at the end of the day, it's just that's not the weight class for him. He's going to have to learn how to get down to 170 if he wants to have success at a high level like the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Santiago Ponzinibbio against Zach Cummins in the welterweight division. Nice win for Santiago. Overall, pretty entertaining fight. The first round was definitely close. Actually, all the rounds were kind of close, but you could tell watching this fight that Santiago, and this was one of the things I said, a little more talented, a little more upside, definitely the better striker than Zach, a little faster, hits a little harder, and Zach just was out of range from his punches landing, just out from getting those, takedown attempts. It just seems like he was just a little bit, not off, just Ponzinibbio's just a little bit better. That's all. And you can also tell that Santiago's really been working on his grappling. Obviously, if Zach wouldn't be able to stand with Santiago, which is a reasonable assumption to assume, you'd have to go to the grappling. However, Santiago stopped 4 out of 5 takedown attempts of Zach, and I think that's a big thing because Zach is a pretty solid welterweight. He's not a small dude for this division. So I think Ponzinibbio has really grown leaps and bounds since his debut there on the Ultimate Fighter at Brazil a few years ago. And beating a guy like Court McGee in his last fight, now beating a tough dude like Zach Cummins. He didn't get the finish, but the fact that I thought he didn't go into a wild flurry that could get him caught against the guy that could put him away with either a submission or a knockout. He paced himself well. He was hitting hard. He looked like he was striking fast as well. He avoided getting hit. I mean, 152 thrown strikes for Zach and only 35 landed. So he did a good job of not getting hit too. Stuffed the takedown 4 out of 5. I thought this was maybe Santiago's best performance inside the octagon, and definitely a guy that is now trending up. And for Zach, I don't think it was necessarily a bad fight. Just he's maybe going to have to just work on a few things. I think his willingness to strike in the first round, I think, is maybe kind of what got him in trouble. I think because of that success, getting tagged, still being able to move forward, I think maybe gave him a little bit of false sense of security that he could stand up with this guy for 15 minutes. And I think he should have switched to more grappling and inside, making it dirty earlier. And I think then adjusting late, at that time he already kind of got hit too much. And while his output was still there, because again, he's a tough guy, he's always in shape, it was going to be hard to mount a comeback, I think, at that point, because I feel like Santiago had found a rhythm in his striking game, and at the end was definitely hit Zach with some really hard shots, especially those left hooks. So nice win for Santiago. Talis Ladies against Chris Camuzzi. This one, I admit, I got wrong. I picked Camuzzi because I thought this was maybe a time to catch Ladies slipping on a 2-fight losing streak with Camuzzi, kind of rising up and gaining confidence, but Talis Ladies is one of the top jiu-jitsu practitioners, not just in the UFC middleweight division, any division, anywhere in the world, and just put that on display. Was able to take down Camuzzi pretty much at will. I mean, 5'11". I mean, he did stop some takedown, but for the most part, this was all Talis Ladies, and wasn't the most exciting thing to watch. However, Ladies, to do his credit, did finish this fight, finishing in the 3rd round by rear naked choke. So I think to that degree, putting away a guy like Chris Camuzzi is a big deal, and he gets back on the winning track. And for Camuzzi, it's just, obviously at this stage in the game, it's really hard to develop world-class jiu-jitsu skills, but that really seems to be the only guys who really give him trouble. It's really high-class jiu-jitsu guys, as he's lost to Jacare twice and now Talis Ladies. So I give him credit for, he's hanging tough with these guys, but he's just not at their level. And if I was him, anytime they mention a guy that's like a jiu-jitsu black belt, I might take another fight. I just tell him, like, hey, I'll fight anybody but these guys. Because those teams are the only guys that give Chris Camuzzi trouble. But credit to Ladies, he did what he does best, and he gets back on the winning track. Hani Jason against Dennis Bermudez. Pretty much expected this, that Jason would have a tough time keeping this fight standing, keeping it at range. and being able to get off his offense where I thought he would be the better striker. Bermudez really just took him out of his game from the start. Officially only landed 5 of 10 in the takedown department, and that's mainly because he went 0 for 3 in the third round. But however, by the time this fight got to the third round, Hani Jason was all bloodied and battered from getting outstriked 32-4 in round 1 and then 22-4 in round 2, not to mention being taken down 4 times in that second frame. I don't think he had much left in the gas tank, and at that point, Bermudez, really short of getting knocked out, probably wasn't going to lose that fight. Wins the unanimous decision victory. Another good win for Dennis, kind of after having those tough losses to Ricardo Lamas and Jeremy Stevens back-to-back. He had the win over Kawajiri earlier this year, now the win over Hani Jason. Called out Frankie Edgar after the fight. I think that would be a tremendous matchup. Of course, you got Frankie Edgar from New Jersey, Dennis Bermudez being a native of upstate New York. I think that would be a tremendous fight if that happened. However, I did mention earlier in the broadcast, I think a fight between Cub Swanson and Dennis Bermudez would be excellent as well. So we'll see how kind of that all plays out. But kind of expected from Dennis Bermudez, did what he did best in taking out Hani Jason, now allowing him to get off that striking. In the main event of the evening, also in the featherweight division, Yaya Rodriguez against Alex Casseras, better known as Bruce Leroy. Definitely the best fight of the night, deserving of fight of the night honors. And I thought just an excellent performance by Yaya Rodriguez. If there was any doubt about this kid's conditioning or his striking ability or his output ability, I think that was all answered here. Fighting at elevation in Utah, main event for the first time against a solid UFC veteran like Bruce Leroy. I think this was his best performance in the octagon. I mean, 25-minute fight, he threw 343 strikes to just 202 for Bruce Leroy. Also did land a takedown. That was late in the 5th round. Casseras also traded and landed one of his own as well. I think the only round I probably would have gave Casseras, round 3, although Yair did outstrike Casseras 27-14. I thought Casseras maybe had the biggest moment for him in that fight, where in a scramble he was able to land on top and rain down blows from guard to end that 3rd round very strongly. And I could have considered giving Bruce Leroy round 3 and possibly round 5. However, at no point in this fight did Casseras outstrike Rodriguez in a round. Looking at round by round, going 1 through 5, Rodriguez outstruck Casseras 16-8, 23-6, 27-14, 25-14, and 33-23. So at no point in this fight did Casseras have a round where he outstruck Rodriguez. And going at total striking numbers, 124 of 343 for Rodriguez, just 65 of 202 for Casseras. And early on, I thought Casseras wasn't as gauging as much as because he was trying to figure out the crazy style of Rodriguez, trying to counteract that a little bit. But then it seemed as the fight went on, I don't know if it was just the crazy striking of Rodriguez that he was having trouble figuring out, or if it was he was looking to counter but didn't, or just, I don't know what it was, but it didn't seem like Casseras was pulling the trigger enough. And I think that's one of the reasons why he lost this fight. For whatever reason, he was sitting back a lot more than I'm used to seeing Bruce Leroy fight. And whether that was something that Rodriguez was doing with the crazy striking, with pushing forward, with the output, that negated Casseras doing it, I'm not sure. I don't know if it was a mental thing with Casseras, fighting at elevation, being in the main event for the first time. Maybe that got to him. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, I thought Casseras didn't counter well enough and obviously didn't put up enough output to win this fight. And Rodriguez, it didn't seem like he had too much concern for what Bruce Leroy was going to do out there, and just went and did his game plan and just kept on throwing strike after strike, crazy kick, solid combination. He just kept on pushing forward and kept on pushing combinations in the face of Bruce Leroy. And to be able to do that for 25 minutes without slowing down in your first ever main event at elevation at just 23 years old, I thought this was a fantastic performance. looking back, I'm a little surprised it ended up being a split decision. I think it's very hard when you look at the numbers that Bruce Leroy won 3 rounds of this fight, as one judge did give this fight. So I think this should have been a complete unanimous decision. The one judge did score it 49-46, I believe, in favor of Yaya, and that's probably how I would have scored this fight, to be honest. And for Rodriguez, not to say that Bruce Leroy is a slouch, but he definitely gets someone in the top 15 for his next fight. I know just because they all fought in the same card, but however that works out between Swanson, Bermudez, possibly I think you can throw in Max Holloway in that discussion, Frankie Edgar as well. Yaya, I think, matches up with one of those guys in the top coming up. Maybe a Ricardo Lamas, I'm not sure. But he's obviously in the picture as well. But this kid's going places. I mean, if he can put a performance like that, he's definitely has a future in the stacked featherweight division. Once again, I'd like to thank Megan Anderson for coming on the show, talking about her fight there at Invicta FC 18. Again, you can follow her on social media, Twitter and Instagram at MeganA_MMA. I'd like to thank my good friend Adam Nelson, a.k.a. Gorilla the Bear. Please give him a follow on Instagram and Twitter. Always doing excellent work, artwork in the world of mixed martial arts. And, of course, you can hit him up to do some own original artwork for yourself as well. Again, it's Gorilla the Bear on Twitter and Instagram, so give him a follow. And if you're interested in getting a piece of original artwork, he can do that for you. So also give a shout out, as I did earlier, the MMAcommunity.com, some of the top forums to talk mixed martial arts. Also, they do live Q&A with top MMA athletes as well. So if you haven't already signed up, I think if you sign up, I think they're still running a contest. If you sign up for their contest, you can win a t-shirt or a hat with the MMA community logo and stuff. So go fill out. It's easy. It's free. It's fun. MMAcommunity.com. Also, of course, we're partners on Facebook at facebook.com/MMA Fight Club. Always posting up questions and comments and posts and videos and chat discussion and stuff like that. So join the discussion there at MMA Fight Club on Facebook and like their page today. Speaking of Facebook, we're still running our 500 like contest, I should say. We are 22 likes away from hitting 500. So we're getting close there. So go ahead and like the Beyond the Cage Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, for your chance to start this contest up here with 22 more likes, giving away a host of signed 8x10 photos from various MMA and kickboxing stars in the contest. All the pictures are available right there on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And of course, subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube to get instantly updated on when we have new shows, as well as interview segments at facebook.com or at youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Please subscribe. And also, speaking of interviews, if you missed an interview or like a sneak preview, sometimes I'll put it on there before it happens on the show or is posted on YouTube or any other social media. Follow me on SoundCloud. It's soundcloud.com/Jim Graham, and you can check out the latest interviews and sneak peeks to some of the interviews that I have featured here on Beyond the Cage. And also, if you don't like listening on SoundCloud or you don't like watching on YouTube, Beyond the Cage is also on iTunes, and we're also now on Google Play. So if you prefer to listen to Beyond the Cage that way, you can do so, as well as the Stitcher mobile app as well. So if you like listen to just the audio version, 3 different ways for you to digest Beyond the Cage between Stitcher, iTunes, and Google Play. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham and on Instagram as well at the Jim Graham. Let's see, am I missing something? Oh, AJ Hiller, MMASignaturesUSA.com. Please check out the latest and signed mixed martial arts memorabilia there, MMASignaturesUSA.com, MMAinsider.net, MMAforlife.ca. Top Rated MMA, of course, giving proceeds of the gear you buy there at Top Rated to the Higher Heroes Foundation, which, of course, the great Brian Stan is a part of. And, of course, they give proceeds to the Higher Heroes, which, of course, is looking for work for United States military veterans. So it goes to a good cause. So For them, and for myself here, Jim Graham, thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.